means that for those that are older, their sort of sentence on paper is much shorter than that of young people. But we're only perceiving this like shorter sentence from the perception of us as young people, where we're not perceiving from the sort of shoes of those old people, where for those that may only have 5 months left for their lives, they could have spent 5 months left like accomplishing their bucket list, accomplishing like going on vacations, to accomplish their greatest dreams. So in this case, even 1 month is very substantially significant to those, compared to 1 month for like a 20-year-old where he still had like 1,000 more one month. So this is the first justification. And the second reason is rehabilitation. The justice system's sole purpose is not revenge. There is intrinsic to revenge. There are also purposes of rehabilitating, where you want a criminal to go back to society and become a functioning member of society as a whole. What we see in the system is that for those that realize they will spend their lives, die in jail, we want these people to rehabilitate. They do not actually have the incentive to do so, realizing that because the sole purpose of rehabilitation is to sort of prepare them to go back to society. And when a person realizes that they will spend their lives, rest of their lives, die in prison, they lack the fundamental incentives to actually participating and changing in their lives in these rehabilitation systems. Where on our side, through the dynamic and sort of like relative and proportional system, we see that regardless of almost all cases of crime, excluding those that are extremely bad and will sort of just be punished in death, which is symmetrical on both sides, most of the people will see an endpoint towards their crime, and this means that there will be much more future-oriented in a way that sort of incentivize them to actually be prepared for the time where they actually go out to society and become a functioning member. What this means is that we will achieve a world where criminals, when they are sent to jail, they are sort of just dynamically and like fundamentally more incentivized to actually participate and be proactive into the involvement of rehabilitation. And I'll take a view on.
Okay. Rehabilitation requires extensive infrastructure to help people actually change their lives. How does your side actually change the structure of the entire criminal justice system just because sentences sometimes get shorter?
Because sentences don't get shorter. Sentence is applied equally to the perception of a certain person. And what this means is that this still empowers and prompts these criminals to actively be involved into the rehabilitation, which is very much an exclusive benefit on our side. So moving on to the third argument. The third argument is on better uses of resources. We see in the status quo, jails are becoming nursing houses, where we see that in countries like Japan, where these just old people tend to commit crimes, not because they're intrinsically bad, but because they feel like the cost of nursing houses is too high, and that jail not only provides sort of free food, they provide free healthcare, and they also provide like a company to like keep you like not alone compared to what they might be when they're living in normal society. And this is often the case because when they commit a very light crime, like just stealing a bread, they're often sentenced to death in their like perception of time, where they might only be sentenced like 1 year, but 1 year is all that they got. So to a very standard in the status quo's narrative, 1 year is a life sentence, but to them it is a death sentence. And what this means is that we as the government's perspective have to pay and have to sort of take care of this person that is not intrinsically bad and that is not the target of what the justice system should be paying resources to. What this means is that through the proportional system, this means that those who are not intrinsically bad and should already be having a lighter sentence due to their sort of life expectancy will be sort of just disincentivized from committing these crimes in the first place. Knowing that like committing these crimes only buy them like a week in jail, where they still have to come back to the real society and actually be a functioning member of society. So in conclusion, our sides have proven three things. First is that it is principally justified to use a proportional system as in lack of like taxes, and as in lack of fines. And the second reason is that this better fulfills and sort of incentivizes prompts these convicts to be going on active involvement in rehabilitation, but it also justifies the fact that it empowers higher usage of resources on our side. And for that, I'm proud to propose.
Only roll for opposition to open all case here.
First, some framing. We think duration and percentage of life is just completely different concept. First of all, the amount of punishment is just completely different. Someone is just in jail way longer than the other person. And secondly, people don't perceive life as percentage, and it's different. Life is not money. People just don't see it that way. People perceive life as don't perceive life as percentage, but rather duration. For example, if I say people say I spent 4 years in college, but I wouldn't say I spent a certain percentage of my life in college. And thirdly, it's not proportionally just for the victim or for the criminal's family. This calculation only applies for the criminal, and the victim don't really get justice. And we have 3 arguments. First one is about deterrence fails. So this creates a lower cost for people who are older or who have a shorter life. Yes.
Considering that in the SAT school, you're evaluating the SAT school of where we don't evaluate time as percentage. But considering if you realize we only have 20 years, doesn't that mean that you're more cautious as to the use of even a single day?
My partner will deal with this. Back to my point, it creates lower costs for older people, and this would encourage more crimes from the older people, and also potentially create a market for criminals to actually pay old people to commit crimes, or people with cancer. The second argument is this is just principally unjust to treat people differently under the law. Someone who's younger or healthier just get punished for way more severely just because they live longer. This basically just introduced ageism and ableism. And the third is that the group who have a shorter lifespan, they're usually more disadvantaged people or a minority because they have less access to healthcare, or they have less resources to have a better life quality, or they're economically more disadvantaged. That makes them commit more crimes because it's a rational calculation. When you don't have other option, when you don't have money, then the only option you have is to steal. So these have 2 really bad impacts. One is it worsens the perception of these groups, and secondly, it accelerates the circle of poverty and making crimes a better option for people who are more oppressed. Thank you.
I have to use a microphone.
I already know the problem with the microphone.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, when you are, thank you.
Oh, that's
Hello.
recording.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's okay though.
I don't know, man. Y'all don't have a tripod.
We can all see your notes. Or the lab notes.
Five. Oh my god, that sounds so bad.
跟平常差不多
You mean hearing yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
It's okay, just don't listen to yourself.
Okay.
Alright, how about you can't speak here. Right in front of the camera.
No lah.
Is my volume fine?
Come here now.
It's fine for us, but you know.
It's not fine for a
Think
computer.
about the
Okay,
people
actually,
in the
I don't
street.
really care about.
Recording.
It's their fault for not being here.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, dear.
Sorry.
Yeah, they can just put it on speaker later on.
5 days mean more to you when you only have a week left to live. In comparison, when you have 100 years to live, what does 5 days mean to you? It doesn't matter. It's just a simple click of time away. So for my speech, first I will go through some responses and into our argument about why victims would have better closure on our side. What has the opposition side told us? They told us that on our side, the system is somehow unfair to minorities because minorities have a shorter lifespan. We believe that this is actually more beneficial on our side. It is because due to systematic pressures, due to systematic issues, disadvantages that they have, sure, it means that they will live a shorter time span. That further means that they don't deserve as much time and as much punishment to the people who can live longer if you're richer. It's because you have better access to healthcare, you have better access to things that extend your life. The proportion of harm done to these rich people is significantly less than the proportion of harm and punishment dealt out to the poorer population, right? So on our side, we believe we actually fulfill the purpose of justice system, which is to provide, to equate punishment as a form of retribution, right? And secondly, the way they try to address that people perceive time is different from money. Sure, but the issue is, throughout our first speaker has already mentioned, the reason why time also applies in this case is just simply you value your time based on how much time you have left. Like again, with the example provided, it's similar to money in the sense that when you only have $100 to spend on, each dollar means way more than if you have thousands of dollars. Because if you only have that $10 taken away, you still have so much time to do anything else. You still have existing so much other capacity to do things to actually gain enjoyment in your life. But in terms of time, when you know that your remaining lifespan is shorter, and when each second counts, the proportion of harm of perhaps even a sentence of a single day, a single year, is very important to you, as it greatly harms you in the sense that you cannot achieve as much enjoyment and happiness in life. So now this leads to my argument on why on our side we actually bring closure to victims. How does victims gain when victims are harmed? How does victims gain closure on both sides of the world? You only gain closure when you see that the perpetrator has suffered to a certain extent, to a certain threshold. What does that mean on our side? On our side, this threshold for everyone is equal, because when the punishment is based on how much time you have lived, it means that the proportion of harm, the proportion of suffering, the proportion of pain for the retribution is equal for every criminal is the same, because you perceive your time, you perceive your sentencing as a percentage of your time left, and you value it equally on both sides of the world. So, in other words, for the victim, you believe that this actually brings more closure on the proposition side. Why? Because, as an example, sure, but I'll take your PY first.
Is the goal of the criminal justice system to be rehabilitative or retributive? Because before you were saying,
in order for them to keep having trust in the justice system. And the reason why on proposition side this is simply non-existent, it is because when you compare it to criminals, and one criminal has 80 years left to live, and another criminal has 40 years left to live. And for the perception on their side, since both sentencing is 10 years, the victim on both cases will feel that the proportion of harm, the proportion of punishment that is given out to these criminals is different. Not because of the time difference. It's because how the perpetrators themselves feel about the punishment as a whole. Because when you feel that your time is more constrained, which exists on our side, because it's due to proportion, you will feel more pain, and for that, the victim will feel that justice is actually truly served. Because everyone has different circumstances, everyone values time differently, and we believe we should base on that, because that is how the criminal perceives pain, and that's how the victim, in the end, can gain a sense of justice that is served, because they recognize the pain has been equal in all cases, of the justice system, and now the justice system has successfully served the justice, basically. And secondly, this is messy. Another response. On their side, they say that on our side, it will lead to a case where perhaps they would somehow hire old people or people with cancer for them to opt into criminal activity because they have lesser time that is spent in jail. But we believe that this issue simultaneously happens on their side, but it's just simply different. Because just like how in the current justice system, when the sentencing is simply set in stone, where no matter your age, it means that the cartels are simply gonna hire people that are younger because the proportion to them, the time that they have to spend in jail is way lesser. The time that they have to suffer for the consequences of their actions is lower. We believe that on their side, they actually are incapable of solving the problem. On our side, we solve this problem because we tell you that the way that people perceive the sentencing, the way that people perceive how much time they have to live is based on their time left alive. And even for the older generation, perhaps yes, on paper they only have to serve comparatively less than someone who has more time to live, but overall they feel the same exact pain. It means that they are less likely to even opt into such criminal activity because everyone feels about the punishment equally. And finally, regarding on our side, why would our rehabilitation system be more effective? Because on their side, when all the punishment is equal, especially in cases where, for example, if the punishment is when the proportion for example, a 50-year-old who commits crime and the sentencing is 30 years, they do not have incentive to even opt into rehabilitation at all. Why? Because rehabilitation requires people to opt in the first place. In order for these people to be taught, they have to want to learn to be taught. Because within these rehab centers, if you don't see yourself as having a life, you don't see yourself as going out and actually have use for these skills that you gain within jail, you are not going to opt into it, and rehabilitation is simply not going to work on their side. On our side, since the proportion of jail time is the jail time that's sentenced for these people is proportionate to the time amount of time they have left, it means that they will understand and they know how much significant amount of time they have left they can survive in society and the value for that to them. This means that when they go into jail, they actually have gained an incentive to actually opt into rehab in the first place because they know that it will actually matter when they get out. While on their side, when the sentencing is simply a blanket system, many people who do not get the ability to come out of jail and actually give back to the society doesn't exist anymore. That's why we're proud to propose.
Wait, can people hear me if I talk like this? Okay, maybe I'll just like leave this here. Is that okay? Okay. 3 framing points and then I'll go into some clashes. First, on incentive and rational choice. There is a consistent misunderstanding of our case on their side. What we tell you is that when people decide to commit crimes, that crime can be considered as a rational choice, right? The reason why people commit crimes is they believe that the risk-benefit calculus of committing a crime outweighs whatever other options they have. This is why you're more likely to see people committing crimes when they're in cases of extreme economic desperation, right? When people are economically desperate, they view the risk calculus and the risk trade-off of doing something like committing crime as more reasonable for them because they believe that that benefit is high enough to outweigh whatever like really destitute economic circumstances they're in otherwise. So what are the implications for this? First of all, I think that this doesn't apply to the argument that to the counter argument that they give to our third point about who is more likely to commit crimes, because they just talk about deservingness of punishment. Look, we're not talking about who deserves punishment. We're talking about the fact that people are more likely to commit crimes at the point at which the opportunity cost for doing so is lower, right? This applies to multiple groups in this debate. One, it applies to underprivileged groups who we say are now more likely to commit crimes because they tend to have lower lifespans and smaller lifespans, which means the opportunity cost for committing these crimes is lower for those groups. But then second, we think it applies to older people who have less time overall. But I'll talk about why the perception of time is different on both sides. But then the second thing that I want to evaluate here is about who gets greater deterrence, right? They give you this conception throughout the debate that like people perceive their time as people perceive time as more valuable the less of it that they have left. But like notice that both sides have kind of acknowledged in this debate that like if we're deciding how much punishment you get based on the percentage of your lifespan that's left, that percentage is going to be lower if you have less life left. So what this means is that there's always going to be less deterrent on their side because their side is the side that has to have shorter sentences. So really the accusation that they're making is they're too much deterrent on our side of the house, but actually we're willing to bite that bullet because we think that less crime is good, and we think that more deterrent effect is always good. Because notice, like, on their side, if they're saying that, like, oh, people still value their lives so much that, like, shorter sentences are, like, sufficient for preventing people from doing crimes, I think, one, we can just shorten sentences on our side of the house if they believe that long sentences are disproportionate for everyone. We don't think that this necessarily entails treating people differently on the basis of their age. But then notice that there's just always going to be more crime because literally as they tell you, and this is a huge knife in their case, people perceive time differently, and some people might just, like, evaluate the value of their life differently and evaluate their time differently. Insofar as, like, sentences are always shorter on their side, which again underlies all of their argumentation, notice that deterrent is always going to be less on their side, so they get more crime. They have to fight that, given that the crimes we're discussing are probably pretty serious insofar as we're discussing, like, long prison sentences. This is unlikely to be something like petty theft. It's more likely to be something like murder. You just get more of that stuff on their side. You get a society that is less safe. You get more murders. You get more crime. We think crime is bad. They have to fight that. But then on the perception of time, look, I think that the understanding of time on our side versus their side is in terms of, like, quantity versus linearity, right? We're saying we have a linear perception of time, which is to say that people are likely to evaluate the value of the amount of time based on the perception of their entire life rather than the perception of necessarily how much time they have left, right? So we're actually saying that maybe the amount of time that people have left at the end of their life is, like, somewhat valuable to those people, but it's more contextualized within the length of the life that they live, right? Like, the POI that Alistair gives is, like, really important here when they say, like, oh, you know, you measure the amount of time, like, the amount of time that you do things like be in high school or are married in terms of duration rather than percentage of lifespan, because that is how people typically conceive of time, right? They measure things in terms of duration rather than lifespan because that contextualizes it within the entire linear experience of time over the course of your life, which means that I actually contest the, like, again, like, knifed evaluation of time on their side of the house, that time is, like, necessarily quantitative. This is also why I think that the analysis that Jamie gives you is important, right? Time is not like money. Money is a fixed amount that can fluctuate, and you can spend different amounts of it on different stuff. I can blow $1 million on, like, I don't know, doing a fancy vacation if I want to, but I can't do that with time because time progresses in a way that money does not, right? This means that, like, the analogy between, sure.
If you only have one day left to live, would you still stand here and do debate or do things that are actually you believe more important to you?
I would do debate because I love debate. Anyway, I think that this is plenty important, but I also think that, like, again, the conception that you give is different, right? Like, maybe if I have a short amount of time left, I think that I would just continue living my life because I think my life is nice and I like the way I'm living. Maybe I wouldn't want to, like, make some big, like, grand statement, right? People have different ways that they want to spend time and different amounts of things. Like, this is why the analysis Jamie gives you is important, right? Where it's like some people at the end of their life might value more doing a crime in order to give a lot of money to their family and make sure that their family is well off for the rest of their lives than to, like, spend that time in a way that's conducive, right? But the only place that you get that trade-off is on your side of the house, right? On our side of the house, where the deterrent is always greater, you're going to always see people less likely to do that, right? Because, like, you don't create the incentive to do that because people don't know that they're going to get out eventually. But then let's go into the actual responses here. I know that this is, like, kind of mixed up. First, on victim closure, look, huge knife here where, one, you can't decide if the justice system is rehabilitative or retributive. There's also no dealing with the POI that I give, which is that, like, having a rehabilitative justice system requires, like, a rehabilitative infrastructure. You have no mechanism for getting that infrastructure, right? This entire argument is predicated on a future that doesn't exist. So, one, I think you can't just buy that the justice system overnight becomes, like, rehabilitative, right? That just doesn't happen. Just because people get out sooner doesn't mean that they're rehabilitated. I think that, like, all of the anti-criminal and, like discriminative job, you know, like, practices that exist to discriminate against people who have, like, criminal records, you know, just exist on both sides, except now they apply to more people on your side because more people are getting out sooner. But then second of all, in terms of everyone values time differently, yeah, everyone does value time differently. This is exactly why it's, like, super subjective, which is exactly what you're saying. This works for our side because if people subjectively evaluate time differently, then some people are going to subjectively evaluate it in a way that leads them to commit more crimes, which happens on our side when you have less deterrence. Then second, you say that, you say that, like, jails and nursing homes, jails become nursing homes because people's perception of time, they, like, want to commit crimes. Look, I think that Japan is a really isolated position. I think that in most of the world, people don't want to be in jail if they're, like, old. I also think that in most places in the world, there's, like, some degree of filial piety such that, like, most old people are taken care of by their families. So I think that this is, like, an edge case and you should not evaluate this argument on that basis. But then, like, in terms of, like, victims and criminals' families, Yeah, I think that this is a really important argument that's misunderstood by them, right? We think that justice does not end with the perpetrator. Justice also has to do with the victim. Insofar as they say the perception of time is subjective, we think that victims primarily measure time in terms of their own lifespans rather than like somehow projecting themselves into the mindset of the perpetrator and then evaluating time that way. If a victim perceives the amount of time in comparison to their own lifespan to be disproportionate, that victim is going to feel super wrong and feel like the justice system is not serving them. Very proud to oppose.
Okay, so my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. A couple of rebuttals and clarifications before I move on to the 4 main clashes of this debate. Firstly, in terms of rebuttals and clarifications, I think opposition has a clear misconception on our side case. In our side of the house, criminal sentences won't simply become shorter. Sure, to old people, it will be comparatively shorter, but we believe that there would still be a limit in which we believe that the length of the sentence will still provide deterrence and rehabilitation to old people. But in our side of the house, it is very clear that if we have proportional sentence to young people, for example, from the age range of 20 to 30%, if the sentences are proportional, it will be comparatively longer to the sentences that these type of people receive on opposition, so it's also sentences won't simply become shorter. And secondly, on extending on my deputy speaker's response on opposition's point that people don't judge time through percentage. We believe that this point is contingent to the fact that people is uncertain to when their life will end. However, in this specific motion, there is a clear pinpoint in which people's lifespan ends, right? So for example, if you have a limited $1,000 of pocket money every month, it's easier for you to count every money you spend as a percentage of how much you have spent your $1,000. Same as to lifespan in this case. So we believe that percentages still count as a clear metric for people to judge whether or not their sentences are long or short. And we believe that on our side of the house, we still have capable. I don't really get why opposition says that on our side of the house, we don't have enough rehabilitation infrastructure, because we do see that in jails in this school there is rehabilitation courses teaching criminals the skills that is capable for them to still maintain a stable living when they get out of jail. So rehabilitation won't really be a problem on our side of the house. And fourthly, opposition points out that people can hire old people to commit crimes on our side of the house. Here there is a response. Firstly, we believe that old people don't really have a significant amount of capability to commit very serious crimes. As people that are in the range of 20 to 40, for example. And also on their side of the house, we believe that they also pointed out that in very serious economic crisis for an individual, it's inevitable that these people are incentivized to commit crimes, right? So these types of old people on both sides. So for those that don't really have the family to support them and are left alone, it's also very easy for old people in these cases to commit crimes, right? And moreover, on our side of the house, we ensure that when they go into jail, there is rehabilitation for these old people, because they know that after their proportionate jail sentence, they will still get out of jail and have to maintain a stable life, right? And moreover, on our side of the house, since that this is a proportional sentence for old people, and they understand that they have to get out, they get out after a certain amount of time. It's easier for us to regulate these old people, because for those criminals that just get out of jail, there would be paroles, or there would be like officers monitoring their acts. So it's easy for us to ensure that these old people on our side of the house won't reoffend crimes, right? So we actually decreases the amount of crime happening in the society, which is a mutual end goal on both sides. So falling on to clashes, first clash on equality versus life experience. On their side of the house, they believe that equality stands on equal amounts of sentences for equal crimes. But we believe that proportional sentence also reaches the more moral equality, because in terms of weighing on our side's model, we deliver substantive fairness over formal equality by providing equal impact for equal wrongdoing, which is more just in our side of the house. And following on to the second clash on deterrence. So in opposition, people in the range of 20 to 30 years old specifically can commit crime and receive, like, for example, a 10-year sentence. While on our side of the house, for these people, we actually, in proportionately, they will receive a sentence longer than 10 years, so we will receive higher amounts of deterrence for specifically these younger groups of people. So there won't be like more crimes on our side of the house as stated by DOO, so at this point it's very absurd. I don't get why on our side of the house there won't be enough deterrence. And following on to the third clash on victims' compensation. So in opposition, in their side's world, two offenders of law, one 18 years old and one 80 years old, both received a 1-year sentence, for example, for humiliating Morris's height, right? As Morris, he is extremely humiliated and outraged and wants to seek for justice and see that the offender is restricted in jail for a very long time, right? However, when he knows that the offender only received 1 year of jail, that only accounts for less than, for example, 2% of his or her life, Morris on opposition will not feel compensated. While on our side of the house, Morris on our side will feel relatively compensated because they understand that, for example, the 18-year-old offender that humiliated him has a sacrifice more lifetime because he has committed certain crimes, right? So following on to last clash on rehabilitation, we believe that on opposition, it's less likely that they will reach the end goal of rehabilitation because for people that are, for example, in life sentence, for all people that are in life sentence, they don't have the incentive to rehabilitate because they simply feel like there won't be a very long enough time for them to live on when they get out of jail. While on our side of the house, by providing a proportionate time, we ensure that for these old people, they understand that when they ended their life sentence, they still have, for example, 5 years, 6 years to live their life. And it's important that without the support of their families, they still have to live a life on stable living because they are on parole. They cannot through another crime or reoffending crime to stay alive or use the resources of jails to live till they die, right? So in our side of the house, it's specifically for old people or people older at a older life stage. It's important that on our side of the house we do provide rehabilitation. So in conclusion, our side relatively wins this debate because we prove to you why we fulfill the criminal justice system's purpose of deterring people at a younger age, rehabilitating older people, and also we provide compensation to victims. In this case, very proud to propose.
Can you hear me? I just want to talk about the principle, and especially the justification that we give you of how people perceive time. Because Jimmy already tells you that people perceive time as just years as opposed to percentages of their life, right? Government side tries to counter this by saying that we only conceive of time in this way because we exist in the world we exist in now, where we don't have access to the information about our remaining lifespans. I think this still fails to take down our point for three reasons. First, I think the fact that punishment decreases with time means that you still have different perceptions of time as you age, right? Because when you're young, you get a 13-year sentence for the same crime that you get a 3 months life sentence for when you're old, right? I think this means that people are still able to tell the difference between the sentence that they get when they're young versus the sentence they get when they're old. I think they're able to tell the difference and they're able to conceive of the difference meaningfully across their lifespan. I think secondly, most people just don't go to jail that often. The fact that you get different sentences and you conceive of your time as a proportion of your remaining lifespan, it just relies on the fact that you have to go to jail and have like experienced that feeling of being sentenced to 3 months versus like 13 months or like whatever. I think most people don't really do this, and so I think that means that the majority of the population still conceives of time as absolute as opposed to as a proportion. But I think thirdly, it's just a bit inconvenient to cross-reference your time with other people's time if you always conceive of it as proportion, right? Because I can't go to like Maya and say, hey, do you want to spend 1% of your day with me? Or 1% of your remaining lifespan with me? Because Maya doesn't know how much that is, right? I think that just means that the majority of society will still use the absolute measure of just years or like time being absolute as the way in which they conceive of time. But the second response I have to this thing, or to the government push about how we only conceive of time in this way, is that they mostly push this with regard to people who are at the end of their lives, so like old people or people who like have short lifespans. I think there's a tension in this case because they say both in the beginning of their case that old people in Japan commit a lot of crime because they're desperate and they want to get into like jails and use them as nursing homes. But they also say that old people value their lives very much, so they think that like if you know you're about to die, you won't want to commit a crime as much. I think there's a tension here because if on our side old people are already this desperate to get into jails, even though they know that they will get far longer sentences than they will on opposition side, I think this means that on their side they're not able to get the deterrence that they try to claim, just because the underlying social structures that cause people to be this desperate and commit this much crime are still unchanged. I think either they accept that old people are more deterred on our side because they value their lives more, or they have to accept that on their side old people like commit worse crimes and they commit more crimes. But on the subject of I want to talk about proportionality because they say that you have proportionality in other systems, so it's also fair to have proportionality in the time of sentencing. I think this is untrue because in other systems, the reason why you have proportionality is because there are factors outside of people's control that contribute to inequality if you force them to have consistent measures across different demographics, right? Like you have proportional tax because poor people are not poor because they want to be poor. Who wants to be poor, right? I think this means that in the case of time, where this is, or in the case of crime and in the case of sentencing, the choice to commit a crime is entirely rational. There are no other things that force you to commit crimes with regards to like the time that you have remaining. I think this means that it's just unfair for you to use, for you to have different punishments for different people in this particular system. I think the caveat here is that we still support mitigating factors, right? Like if you have mental illness or if you have like other factors that make it so that you don't rationally choose to commit a crime, you still support that. I think this still applies for like crimes of necessity, where like you obviously consider a person's like entire social social context before you give them a sentence. But the third thing that they say on the principle is that it's okay to let people die in jail, that it's not okay to let people die in jail just because they happen to have less lifespan left. I think it's absolutely fine to let people rot in jail because they made the decision to commit crime knowing that their remaining lifespan is short, because now that Gov pushes that on our side, we also have access to the information about how long we have left to live. So I think, first, they kind of deserve it. But second, it sends the correct message from the government that it's not okay to just commit a crime because you're at the end of your life, or that you're like particularly desperate, because obviously we don't want crime. I think on our side, we're the only side that is able to effectively deter crime, and this is something that is just good. But I want to talk about the deterrence of crime a bit more, because government side says in response to our push about people committing crime more on their side because they know that the sentence that they get will be shorter. They say that cartels will not recruit old people, they will just recruit young people. And then they say that on their side, I think this is untrue, because I think young people still don't want to throw away their entire lives. Because if you really conceptualize your life in like the terms of your remaining lifespan you have left, obviously as a young person you have like a lot of stuff you still are able to do. There's a lot of opportunity cost for going to jail. If you go to jail for 13 years versus 10 years, no thank you. I think this is still not that big of a difference to you, because if you go to jail for 10 years, you still miss out on like your 30s and 40s when you can be like making a business, or you can be extending your career, or just like finding a partner or something like that. I think this just means that you don't get the increased crime in young people that they push onto our side, but you do get the increased crime in old people that we push onto their side. But I think we also are able to prove that there's increased crime in minority groups. just because of the fact that they're still going to be at the same level of desperation under government side. This is going to lead to like increasing cycles of poverty. It's going to lead to worsening perceptions of minorities. I think all of this is just quite bad. But I want to finally deal with rehabilitation. They say that it is good to rehabilitate people, and that if you give people, or if people have shorter sentences and they know that they are able to see the end of that sentence, they will have an increased incentive to cooperate with rehabilitation. I think when you don't really have the structure to support rehabilitation, it doesn't matter if you have the incentive or not, because rehabilitation just doesn't exist. But I think on our side, we do have the incentive for states to incorporate more rehabilitation in jails. Just because when you have less crime, you have reduced burden on jails. This means that rehabilitation is far more likely to be implemented, because when you have groups pushing for like jails to be less like carceral and more rehabilitative, then people are going to support this more. The government is going to support it more because they know that they don't have to spend as much money collectively on rehabilitating prisoners, because there's just less prisoners overall because there's less crime. But I think they also then say that like, rehabilitation already exists. I think if this is the case, then on our side this also exists. But even if like some people still die in jail on our side, like I already told you why they deserve to do it. So very proud to have them.
Ballot for us right at the top is that there is more crime on their side. They try to engage with this, the idea that there are shorter sentences on their side by saying, oh, for young people, sentences don't actually get shorter or longer. Yeah, we don't think young people are the delta here. We think old people are, right? There are some people for whom sentences get shorter. We think young people are non-unique in this debate, but the fact that sentences get shorter for old people means that there is a substantial population. And again, remember the scale. So like middle-aged people also get shorter sentences. There are a substantial number of people whose opportunity cost for committing crimes goes down. This creates more of an incentive to do crime, which means more people are going to do crime on their side at the point at which there are just shorter sentences for a big group of people. They need to fight that there's more crime, extend all of the impacts that we tell you that crime is bad. It causes people to die, it causes property damage, it causes environmental damage. We think that this is just bad, and there is really no way around this without them like defending something that's different from their side. But then, let's talk about the perception of value and the perception of time. Look, they shoot themselves in the foot at the point at which they tell you that people perceive time differently and people value things differently. Look, what does this mean? This means that one, the amount of time that you have left being an unstable evaluation of value for individuals, right? Because people value time differently depending on their subjective perception of time, means that there are always going to be some people for whom, yes, duration does matter more than percentage. We acknowledge that there are some people for whom, like, percentage does matter more, but at the point at which they tell you it's subjective, on their own coin, you can't buy that this applies to every single person, and there are going to be some people who purely evaluate time on a duration level. What does this mean? This means that there are some people for whom the opportunity cost actually does substantially go down for committing crimes because they perceive a shorter duration of time as, yes, less valuable. This is not everyone, but it is at least some people, again, by their own logic. What does this mean? One, it means you get more crime, but two, as we tell you throughout our bench, you get more crime specifically in communities that are economically disadvantaged because these are the communities that are most likely to commit crimes in the first place. What does this mean? This means you get an acceleration of things like the prison industrial complex. This means you get acceleration of things like cycles of poverty, and communities that are more likely to be like impacted by the negative impacts of incarceration are just going to see all of those impacts worsen because those are the people for whom the opportunity cost rising is the highest because, as we characterize for you, and they never contest, these are the populations that already have the shortest lifespan. So notice, one, on their side, they have to buy an increase in crime, but two, they have to buy an increase in crime specifically in the communities that are going to be most harmed by that increase in crime, which means that they perpetuate cycles of poverty for the least advantaged groups in a society. This creates more inequality, socioeconomic inequality, less safety for the people who are already most at risk. Notice that they worsen that inequality on their side of the house, specifically because, again, even if it is not universal, at least some people are going to perceive the decreased duration of time as sufficient, like, for lowering the barrier enough to actually make the decision to commit that crime, right? That has to happen. If you believe that time perception is subjective, that has to happen. But the other reason why the subjectivity of time perception is really important in this debate is because of the characterization that I give you in my speech that's never contested by them, which is that victims also perceive time subjectively. What does this mean? This means, one, unlike the most charitable interpretation of this means that, like, victims are also unlikely to always be able to, like, place themselves in the shoes of the perpetrator such that they view, like, justice as being just proportional to the lifespan of the perpetrator. So notice again, even because time is subjective by their logic, this means that not every victim is going to believe that their justice has been served. But second of all, on a maybe slightly less charitable, but I think more accurate interpretation of this, look, victims just perceive the amount of time someone spends in jail as proportionate to their own lifespan, because that is the subjective perception of time. At the point at which that is not proportional to their lifespan, we think that it is actually extremely likely that victims are not likely to see this as proportional punishment, means that they're more likely to view themselves as being unjustly treated by the justice system. That is a huge impact. They try to talk about moral equality. They've never proved to you why age is a morally legitimate, like, criteria for punishing people differently. Insofar as they don't prove that, the subjective perception is time is not sufficient to say that this is, like, enough to punish people. Lastly, they talk about rehab. We deal with this. This is only dependent on the shortness of time. We don't think that they can just access magical rehab facilities that exist in every jail on their side. Very proud to oppose.
To conclude this speech, I would like to mention some discrepancy on understandings. So they suggest that we do not evaluate the value of time as in proportions. But at the same time, their whip also mentioned that young people are less likely going to commit crime because they realize the potential life expectancies they might have and how much this punishment may affect compared to the full potential of their life. So in some way, they are already evaluating their values of these criminals' judgments comparing to their full potential in a way that is proportionate. And on the same side, even if you were to suggest that people have different and variety in terms of value, this doesn't necessarily mean that just because I value my time less, I will necessitate to commit crimes. Just because I value time less doesn't mean that I'm intrinsically bad to a point where if I value time less, I'll just commit crime. So if this is 6 days punishment, and if it becomes 5 days, I'll just commit the crime. This is intrinsically false because this stands on the premise that we are all intrinsically evil, whereas in society, those who actually commit crime, those who are the average rational people do not commit crimes just because they have different values in time. And despite these variants in terms of slight variations as to how they value their time, there's still a common sense where the less things you have, the more valuable they become. If we were to suggest that time is money, simply put, is that if we have less money, we will just be intuitively considering the less of the money as of the proportion that we actually have. Whereas on their side, they continuously assume that we do not value proportions under the circumstance that we do not have understanding as to the complete and concise sort of life expectancies through the calculations. And also, they suggested as their reply that when a victim sees their criminal being punished as to their proportions, they do not feel much because they're viewing from their sort of viewpoint. But see as an example where if I as a poor person was robbed by a millionaire and the court just finds $100 towards this millionaire, I do not perceive that to my scale of money because $100 to me may be a lot, but to the billionaire itself, which is most likely going to be received, is not much. Which means that in a way, victims will still feel like they are given justice by the justice system because they're still perceiving most intuitively by the perception of the sort of criminal themselves. And on the other analysis where their full case is heavily built on is the case where sort of desperate people will commit crime. We see it as an analysis of twofold, where either you are a desperate old person who on both sides will commit crimes because they're already desperate, but if you're a happy old person, you're more likely not going to commit crimes on both ends. And considering if you're a desperate old man, you're more likely going to commit more crimes because not only do you get more savings or you get like free food in jail. But on our side, you do not have that much time because you already will not be on a full sentence, but you will also be on like patrol. So either way, you're going to be overlooked by a certain degree. So in conclusion, our side have already proven the burden that not only do sort of people perceive in time, and it should be justified where the justice system should be applied in the same way, where it's only sort of equal and fair in a way where we evaluate the punishment in terms of proportions, but on the same time, we also proven that through these proportional punishment, we can achieve better use of resources, and we can also achieve just general better fairness and better achievement of the criminal justice system. And for that, I'm proud of the vote. Oh my god, it's so cute. No, it's not. First round is